Dan Welsh spoke to the Liberal Democrat candidate, Nick Solman.
Firstly, to begin, Nick, why do you want to be an MP?
Well, I think with Brexit being the key issue that it is at the minute, I feel that there's something that I can do to really help the local area and our country. Especially in the local area, we've got a lot of jobs here that depend upon Europe. We in the Lib Dems have got a very clear point of view, and that completely aligns with my personal thoughts. And I think if I can help us to get a soft Brexit or no Brexit at all, preferably, then that'll be a huge help to the local area, and I can do my bit in that sense.
So if you were to win the election, would your position be to simply end the Brexit negotiations now, or would you prefer to continue the negotiations and do a second referendum at the end?
Because there was the referendum result, people voted marginally in favour for Brexit. What we would do is we would negotiate the Brexit that was most talked about, so the soft Brexit, more trying to be like Norway. We'd then send that back to the country and let the country decide if that's what they would like to do. Obviously, if people see the terms of the soft Brexit and the costs of it, as well as the advantages, and decide that it's not in their interest, then I think people have to be able to say that they don't want a Brexit at all.
Okay. So specifically for Warwick and Leamington, what do you think you as a Liberal Democrat MP could do for the area?
Well, I think following the Brexit vote, you've got a huge problem with unity within the community. So you've got a lot of people who are thinking that as soon as we come out of the EU, all their problems will be solved. I don't think it's quite that simple. I think we've got far bigger social problems. So we've got the cuts to education, healthcare, social care, and these are things where we're really seeing the difficulties now. My wife's a teacher, and she can see the cuts in education, and they can't spend money on things that the children really need. It's not that these are optional extras. I mean, it's things like atlases, really basic items. So we've got to try and make sure that we can bring the community together again, and that's what I hope that I could do by winning.
Yeah. So as you mentioned before, you are actually a student. You are a master's student at Birmingham University.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know there are many, many students living in this constituency at Warwick University. So what do you think the Liberal Democrats specifically can do for students?
Well, I think starting by giving them a future in Europe is a big thing. I mean, if you look at the Erasmus projects, if you look at the opportunity to work through and travel throughout Europe freely without borders, I think the problem isn't when people are at university quite often, it's when they leave. What sort of climate are they going into? And I think being a student coming out with a good degree only means something if you can get a job at the end of it. If we're going to cripple our economy potentially, I mean, we don't know what Brexit's going to look like, but if there's no choice and that's the avenue we get marched down, then what future do our students have?
Okay. There's been a lot of talk about how this campaign especially has been focused more on the leaders of the parties than maybe previous campaigns have been. So why do you think that Tim Farron should be Prime Minister over Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, he's pretty straightforward. I think that's the best thing that he's got going for him. I think at the moment, with all the difficulties that we've got, talking about spending within the country as well as obviously Brexit, we need to start having open and frank conversations. I think that's something where Tim Farron can really help. He's always been very straightforward. Whenever the Lib Dems have got something wrong, he's come out and said it. I think the same would apply if he were Prime Minister. If something's being done that's clearly not working, I think he's one of the few people in politics who's actually got the courage to stand up and say, it's not right, what shall we do about it, and let's have a discussion within the country.
Okay. So there's been... I know that Tim Farron has ruled out a coalition with either party. Yeah. So if there was a hung parliament, who would you prefer to see perhaps be a minority Prime Minister then? Either Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn?
That's almost the unanswerable question, isn't it? I think I've got to be honest. I don't really have a preference. I think both of their visions for the country are so far from what I personally and my party want. I hate to try and wangle out of this one, but I just couldn't choose. I think both would be equally bad options, but for different reasons.
Okay. You mentioned that your wife's a teacher, and you brought up education quite a lot in your answer.
Yeah.
Obviously, Theresa May is running on a platform of reopening grammar schools and expanding them. What are your thoughts on grammar schools?
I just really don't see the point. If you've got good schools, you don't need grammar schools. But to have good schools, education has to be funded properly. The Conservatives are talking a lot about, well, let's give the power to the teachers and let them decide. And in reality, what that means is we're going to cut jobs at local councils within the education authorities and just drop that work onto the teachers. And so they're not letting the teachers run it as they see. They're just giving all the work to the teachers and hoping that they can get by under, quite frankly, what are ridiculous workloads at the moment.
Yeah. So you mentioned there kind of your opposition to education cuts.
Yeah.
So what would your approach be as a Liberal Democrat to austerity in general? So would you support Conservative cuts to try and reduce the deficit?
I think at the start of the recession, there was definitely an argument for some cuts, but it's how you make those cuts and where you make them. As we're now coming out of the recession, well, we've come out and hopefully things are going to get better from here on in. I think we've got to look at where we want to spend our money, but also how we want to tax people. So is our tax system fair? And one of the things that we did was in the coalition was to increase the income tax threshold, which it's about not taxing the money that people need to live on. I mean, a similar thing could be done with national insurance, so that people who are on very low incomes are paying a lower rate or none at all, so that they can put bread on the table before they're having to pay tax to the government.
Okay. I know you must hate having this question, but whenever Lib Dems and student politics comes up, what would you say to students who feel that they can't trust the Lib Dems because of what they did on tuition fees when they were in the coalition?
I think that's a perfectly valid question. As one of the few candidates, and we don't know who some of the candidates are in this constituency yet, but I think I'm probably going to be one of the only ones, if not the only one, with a student debt. So I understand why people aren't happy about paying tuition fees. There's really no way of getting around it. We changed our position on it. I would like a world where there was enough money within the government to be able to offer everybody free tuition. I think at the moment there isn't, looking at the other areas we've had to make cuts in as well. There was a particularly interesting piece of research done by Edinburgh University which compared Scotland to England, and they found that where they have free tuition in Scotland, there are fewer poor students going to university. And what tuition fees have allowed the universities to do is to actually offer more bursaries to poorer students, improve their facilities so that they can have more students there. So I didn't like the decision at the time. I felt it was the wrong decision at the time, but now that we've got some evidence on two systems, one being funded with free tuition fees, money from government, and one with tuition fees, then we know that it's actually a better system. Mm-hmm. So me and the rest of the student body don't like it, but I think in the long run it was probably the best thing to do. And yeah, I think as Lib Dems we know that we owe students one. I would expect that part of our manifesto is going to be looking at improved funding for students, not in terms of tuition fees, but helping with living expenses. Again, if you're doing a full-time degree, where are you getting that money to live from? It doesn't just grow on trees. Some people have got parents that can give it to them, but trying to do a full-time degree and a full-time job, it's impossible. It's always going to hold you back in your studies, and whether it's in our manifesto or not, that's something that I would definitely be pushing for.
Last night were the local election results. There were local elections here in the constituency.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on the Lib Dems results in those elections?
They were exactly what we'd hoped for. At the start of the election campaign, we sat down as the local Lib Dem executive and said, we've had some poor results in recent years, what's our aim? And our aim was quite simple, get our 3 county councillors back. We managed that, 2 of them with very, very large majorities, and our vote improved across the constituency as a whole, in areas where unfortunately we didn't have the resources to campaign. So yeah, I feel very positive. We've got the same number of county councillors in Warwick and Leamington as the Conservatives, and more than any of the other parties, so I think it was about as good a night as we could possibly have hoped to have had, really.
So in a broader sense, what would your expectations be for the Liberal Democrats in the general election?
Because it's such a unique election, I'm the only candidate that we know who's running so far who is standing on a pro-European platform and a chance of giving the voters the chance for another referendum. Obviously, if we had everybody who voted remain in this constituency vote for me, I'd win really quite easily. It's about making that case for us. I think potentially we can do that. Obviously, having a very young daughter, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think there was a chance of me winning. I think given the county council elections last night and the huge vote that we got in the areas where we campaigned, we're clearly pretty popular around here. I just hope that people are happy with me and the campaign that I'm running and will come and support me.
Okay, just to wrap up, what would your pitch be to Labour voters, specifically in the general election? Because obviously I think there are quite a lot of Labour voters who are undecided, who are open to voting Lib Dem. So what would your pitch specifically to them be? I
know there are a lot of Labour voters who don't want a hard Brexit and also want to make sure that public services are protected. I think the vote for me would be to do exactly that. We might be able to keep you in Europe. Worst case scenario is we'd end up with a soft Brexit. And I know that we need to start pumping more money back into healthcare and education, amongst other things. I think it's going to be very difficult for the Labour Party to win round here. Jeremy Corbyn clearly isn't particularly popular in Warwick and Leamington based on last night's results. So if you want a chance of staying in Europe, if you want good public services, your best option is to vote for me.
And just the second half of that question, sort of,
yeah.
What would your pitch be to any Conservative voters who you think might be open to voting for Lib Dem?
Yeah, again, I think with the Conservative voters, you've got a lot who are very, very angry about Brexit. Here I am. If you want to stay in Europe, I'm your best option. We've had people join us from the Labour Party. We've also had people talking to us from the Conservative Party when we've been out canvassing, both supporters and members, who said that they're really not very happy with this Brexit line that the government's taking. I'm open to people from all parties. I'm happy to speak to anyone. If people's views align with mine, then come and join our campaign. We're here to try and win. We're not just here to try and make up the numbers.
All right, thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much. Cheers.